interested to join this are welcome. It is, I don't know, it's in the program where it takes place, but there are two speakers there. One is Professor Friede Stijle, who yesterday went back to the Netherlands. Otherwise he would be here, but he had to be back. And Odi Dvichayo, I don't know whether I pronounce his name correctly, and if not, I'm sorry, for the Gaya Mada University here in Jogja. He will be here, I will be here. I kind of chair that session, that discussion. There are two short keynotes, and then we have a discussion. So you are invited. If you are interested in joining this, please do so. We start at 2:30 according to the program. Okay, that's for tomorrow. What I'm going to do now is, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Syamsul Rijal, is that correctly pronounced? Yeah, of the International Islamic University of Indonesia in Jakarta. My question is that this new university? Right. Yeah, very good. He is a lecturer also there, but his special focus, his expertise is contemporary Islam in Indonesia, and he is doing research project on Hijra, mosque and Salafi use in Jakarta. So he's an expert on Islam and politics, and I'm really looking forward to his talk, because this is a big topic currently, and I understood that also Professor Martin van Bruynesse, who just entered the room, is also speaking about that. Anyway, without much further ado, I give the floor to you, Dr. Rijal. So just a practical thing. We have until 2:15, and well, a talk and then question. I don't know how much you need, but I just keep you going.
Okay, sure.
Or do you want me to interrupt and say it's time?
You can interrupt me.
If you really go way over time,
okay,
I will tell you. Okay, thank you.
Is it clear? Test. Okay. Test. Yeah, I hope you can hear my voice. I think it's going well now. So thank you very much, moderator, and everyone who comes in these sessions. I feel so honored and grateful to be invited as speaker in this prestigious event. So this is my first time joining this summer school. Okay, today I would like to, sorry, can you see my slide, okay? So, sorry. Test, okay. So today I would like to present my paper on the transnational factor or global factor that contributes to the rise of Habaib in contemporary Indonesia. As some of you have already known that Habaib is a subgroup within Hadrami who claim a distance to the Prophet Muhammad. They are sometimes called as Ba'alawi or Sharif. So my paper is a part of my previous research that investigated the rise of Hadrami Arab preachers in contemporary Indonesia. So I hope my study connects to the theme of our its gatherings has been regularly held at night, moving from one public place to another place, and is often attended by 10 to 100,000 people. The other two photos below show the proliferation of books written by a charismatic scholar from Hadramaut, Habib Umar bin Hafiz. So based on this growing da'wah phenomenon, I would like to examine the rising trend of Habaib in Indonesia by looking at the transnational factor or Yemeni factor. So my question in my research is that to what extent Yemeni factor has contributed to the rising authority of Habaib in Indonesia, and then how the unification of Yemen in 1990 has affected the connection between Indonesia and between Indonesia and Yemen, and then how Habaib have used the new connections for promoting their authority in Indonesia. In order to address research, my research question, so we need to go back to the context of Yemen and Hadrami diaspora. The Hadramis have experienced, as you can see from the slide, this is Hadrami diaspora road. The Hadramis have experienced a long history of migration from 7th century to 20th century, but the massive migration happened in the 18th and 19th century. This was because pushing factors such as poverty, drought, and political unrest at home, and also pulling factors such as trading opportunities and religious missionary or da'wah. Their destination is on regions around the Indian Ocean, such as Africa, India, and South Asia. In diaspora, the Hadrami have assimilated with the local communities while maintaining their Hadrami identity. They still maintain their connection or diasporic consciousness to their homeland. This was realized through the sending of remittance to the building of public facilities and mosques in Yemen. Another way is through the sending of their children to Hadramaut to study their belief in Arab culture, especially Arabic in their homeland. This sort of connection was maintained until 1950s, yet it ceased due to the political developments during the Cold War, either in Yemen or in Indonesia. The connection has been revived after the unification of Yemen in 1990. So I will examine forms of the new connection after 1990. So my argument in my study is that there are connection between Indonesia and Yemen in the sphere of Islamic education and preaching has facilitated the growing authority and popularity of Habaib in contemporary Indonesia. Now let's move on to the context of Yemen. Yemen occupies southwestern to southern end of Arabic Peninsula. It is bordered by Saudi Arabia to the north, the Red Sea to the west, the Gulf of Aden and Arabian Sea to the south, and Oman to the east. North Yemen became a state after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in November 1918, whereas South Yemen at the time had been a British colony until 1967. North Yemen became Yemen Arab Republic, while South Yemen became People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. Since its independence, South Yemen was ruled by a socialist regime, and during this regime, the Hadrami Sayyids, according to Alexander Nis, had experienced marginalization, humiliation, and even physical persecution. The Sayyid customs and traditions were abolished by the state at the time. After the breakdown of the socialist regime of South Yemen in 1989, and then followed by unification process, the Hadrami have enjoyed a newly freedom. The Sayyid groups gained free atmosphere in expressing their religious views and reviving their old customs. Their major challenge was and has been the Salafi group, who regard the Sufi groups conducting unlawful innovations or bid'ah. In some occasions, the Salafi activists have tried to disrupt traditionalist rituals and even attack their participants. The tension between the two groups even leads to violence and bloodshed. So within the growing conflict between Salafi and Sayyids in Hadramaut, there emerged what Alexander Nish observed as the resurgence of Sufi-oriented religious movements in Hadramaut. The most influential and charismatic Sayyid figure is Habib Umar bin Muhammad bin Hafiz, popularly known as Habib Umar. He was born in 1963 to Sayyid family of Sheikh Abu Bakar bin Salim in Hadramaut. His father was missing due to political turmoil in the region and is believed to have been killed by the socialist regime's secret police. He studied under several leading scholars in Hadramaut and then moved to Saudi Arabia, where he spent about 10 years for religious education. After the Yemen unification, Habib Umar returned to Hadramaut and established a religious college called Darul Mustafa, or the House of the Chosen One at Tarim. This college has accommodated hundreds of students from various countries, mainly from Southeast Asia and largely from in Indonesia. Habib Umar is also called for reviving Yemeni traditional Islam in Hadramaut by reviving all customs and traditions. The customs include pilgrimage to the shrines of local saints, the celebration of the Prophet's birthday, and collective recitation of Sufi poetry combined with traditional musical instruments. The religious customs have worked to revive the special authority of Sayyids as religious leaders. The distinctive feature of Habib Umar lies in his enthusiasm in religious preaching or da'wah. By traveling from one area to another area, he also actively uses multimedia such as cassettes and DVDs in spreading his messages. The post-unification Yemen led some Hadrami Sayyid scholars to initiate the connection between Hadramaut and Indonesia, and Habib Umar has a prominent role in realizing this attempt after receiving instruction from his teacher Habib Abdul Qadir bin Ahmad Assegaf. This was initiated by the communication between Habib Anis from Solo and Abdul Qadir from Jeddah. So the Habib Anis complained about the worrying condition of Sayyids in Indonesia, where the young generation have left their Sayyid tradition. Therefore, they tried to connect the relationship between Indonesia and Hadramaut as happened in the past. As a result of this, Habib Umar traveled to Indonesia and met some key Habaib scholars in 1993. He took with him 40 Indonesian students, mostly Sayyids, to study in Yemen. The coming of the Indonesian students to Tarim marked the start of Habib Umar in reestablishing his new religious school, Darul Mustafa. In Yemen, the free political atmosphere has enabled the reopening and establishing neo-traditionalist schools and colleges that revive Sayyid's tradition, which is strongly linked with Sufism. Most of the educational institutions are located in Tarim. These are three main institutions that attract international students, especially from Indonesia. They are Darul Mustafa, Ruba Tarim, and Al-Ahgab University. These educational institutes are predominantly led and taught by Sayyid scholars who follow the Sunni theology and Safi school of Islamic jurisprudence. The institutions are now becoming popular among Sayyids and traditionalist Muslims in Indonesia due to the role of Sayyids and returnee graduates to Indonesia. So this is Darul Mustafa. It was founded in 1994 as a result of Habib Umar visit to Indonesia. According to a report according to a report, that the Indonesian student at the Darul Mustafa reached around 300 to 400 in 2009 and 600 in 2010. The Indonesian students who study at the school not only coming from those with Hadrami origin, but also from non-Hadrami who graduated from pesantren or traditionalist schools in Indonesia, especially from Java and Kalimantan. The second one is, this is the first cohort of Darul Mustafa, where you can see the Habib Umar sit in the middle of his students. This is Surubat Tarim. I think this is the oldest educational institution for traditional Islamic studies in Tarim. One of the leader is Habib Salim bin Abdullah Shatiri, and I think he is very famous among Kiais in Indonesia. The third one is Al-Ahqaf University. This is the third major destination of Indonesian students. The university was established in 1995. The only option for Indonesian, however, is the Faculty of Sharia, I mean for the scholarship scheme. The Faculty of Sharia combines the traditional method with the modern educational system, and different from previous traditional institutions, the university provides a formal degree for its graduates. Many Indonesian students were making their destination to Al-Ahqaf University. According to one of my informant, Ismail Sunni, there is a special scholarship provided for Indonesia every year. He estimated that in 2015, there were about 500 to 600 Indonesian students, male and female, studying at the university. The educational network, as I have talked before, has been followed by the creation of da'wah networks among ulama, especially in Southeast Asia. The key players in creating and expanding this network are the Yemeni graduates who have returned to their home countries. They actively spread the religious mission of their respected teacher, Habib Umar bin Hafiz. They admit that Habib Umar always monitors and asks the progress of their da'wah when he comes to Indonesia. In Indonesia, I think there are three venues that graduates have established in order to promote Hadramaut. They are sermon group or Majlis Ta'lim. The second one is traditional pesantren, and the last one is Islamic media. In the slide, you can see the photo of Habib Munzir, the late Habib Munzir bin Fuad al-Musawa. He has established the largest sermon group in Jakarta, the Majlis Rasulullah. This is a good case to see the influence and direction of Habib Umar to his former students in Indonesia. The first and foremost of Habib Umar's influence on Habib Munzir is the da'wah activism, which has major platform on spreading the Hadrami style of Islam as a form of devotion to the Prophet. They call their da'wah as the da'wah Nabawi, or the Prophet's da'wah. The second element, which is borrowed from Habib Umar's style, is the mobility da'wah and the adept appropriation of new media technology. Different from the normal Majlis Ta'lims in Indonesia that regularly take place in one permanent place, Habib Umar moves his Majlis from one public place to another one with full of schedule. We can say every week, full of religious ceremonies. Like Habib Umar, Munzir utilized various media, especially DVD, streaming video, and internet in spreading his messages to wider audience. And the third element is the promotion and the undertaking of the Hadrami Sayyid ritual model in Indonesian context, such as reciting zikir, salawatan, and the recitation of Maulid texts, as well as visiting the graves of Sayyid Sains. Sorry. This is the website of Majlis Rasulullah. You can see there are many kinds of rubrics, such as recordings, also funding. You can see how they provide funding to those who want to donate. Also, there is a registration for followers who want to dedicate themselves to the Majlis Rasulullah. And this is merchandise created by the staffs of Majlis Rasulullah. You can see the branding, Nabawi. They have a special kiosk called Kiosk Nabawi, where they sell DVDs, books written by Habib Munzir, jackets, and even helmet, which is with the logo of Majlis Rasulullah on the helmet. Sorry. The Indonesian graduates from Hadramaut have helped to promote Yemeni traditionalist education in Indonesian societies. Most of the graduates of Rubat Tarim and Darul Mustafa maintain an intense communication and connection with their teacher after they return to Indonesia. Many have established traditionalist education institutions and sermon groups or join existing ones. I met several popular preachers in Java who founded a traditional model of pesantren which adapts the teaching methods and subjects from Hadramaut. The new generation of students are also encouraged to continue their studies in Hadramaut. As the graduates have intense communication and connection with their teacher, especially Habib Umar, they carry out selection tests and travel to Hadramaut. Habib Jamal, I think, is a graduate. I think is a good example. He is a graduate of Darul Mustafa. Upon returning to Malang, he established a small pesantren called Anwarut Taufik with the financial support from a donator in his region. He states that the school establishment was approved by his teacher in Yemen. He also said that he borrowed the Darul Mustafa's model, especially in developing his students' ability to read classical religious books and Arabic language skills. Some of his students have graduated and continue their studies in the Darul Mustafa, Hadramaut. The return of Hadrami educated graduates to Indonesia helped to promote the new rising Sayyid scholars and teachers in Yemen and from few countries in the Middle East. The intense communication and network among graduates with their teacher enabled the former to invite Hadrami scholars to give a sermon or lecture in their program activities. Through such programs, they introduced their charismatic teachers to Indonesian audience. The venues of promotion include pesantren, sermon groups, and media magazine. We can see the examples of print media such as Basma Press in Malang and Al-Kisah in Jakarta. And this is an example of a book produced by Basma Press in Malang, where they actively promote Hadramaut. Okay, so how they promote Hadramaut? The first one, Habaib have actively promoted Islamic seminaries in Hadramaut with several reasons. First, Hadramaut, especially in Tarim, is considered as the genuine centers of traditional Sunnism, with Shafi'i legal schools in the Middle East. Several Indonesian graduates stated that they prefer to go to the Hadramaut than to Mecca and Medina, as the latter have been infused by Wahhabi, Wahhabi teaching. Moreover, Habaib promote Hadramaut as a spiritual center. During their studies in Tarim, the students not only studied Islamic law, but also Sufism through literatures and practices. For Habaib, Tarim is a conducive environment for learning and practicing Islamic piety. The second one, they promote Sayyid scholar as the global and authoritative ulama and gods of Sunni Islam. Various media of Indonesian Habaib have identified several Sayyid scholars from the Middle East as the gods of true Islam. The two popular ones who often become reference in Indonesian publications and preachings are Habib Umar bin Hafiz and the late Sayyid Muhammad Alwi al-Maliki. They describe the Sayyid scholar as the authoritative Sunni ulama from the Middle East who seek to spread the true path of Islam through education and da'wah. The true Islam in their da'wah is traditional Sunnism that has been inherited from Salafuna as-Salihin or the pious predecessors. And the last one, they promote Sayyid scholars as the prophetic exemplars. The Indonesian Habaib promote Habib Umar as the rising star who manifests the perfect character of the prophet. Several informants told me that Habib Umar has precisely practiced the character of the prophet, as well as his ways of religious practice or ibadah and human interaction. His former students who used to interact for years with Habib Umar have used manakib style or hagiographical style in describing his life, his character, and his dedication in realizing his religious missions. Yeah, you can see here a book and a flyer spread in social media where Habaib and Kiai promote Sayyid scholars as ulama Sunni or Sunni ulama. On the next flyer, you can see how they distinguish between Wahhabi ulama and Sunni. So they kind of mixing between Sayyid and Kiai to show that they are really the Sunni ulama. So this is an example of narratives from his former students, the late Habib Munsir Musawa. This is kind of, we can say this is kind of glorification of Habib Umar, and this is always often delivered through their sermon groups. Habib Munsir, in one of his sermons, he said, Habib Umar is a man who has achieved a level of Hafiz, one who has memorized 100,000 hadiths with its sanad and matan. He also has the title of Al-Musnid. Al-Musnid means one who has received thousands of hadiths which link him with other transmitters to the Prophet. During my 4-year study with him in Hadramaut, I have not seen a great person who resembles the Prophet except what I found in his personality. What I read from hadith on the description of the Prophet, such as the way he walks, the way he sleeps, the way he talks, is all found in the personality of Habib Umar bin Hafiz. This kind of glorification of Habib Umar and all the Yamani ulama, on the other hand, also enhanced the authority of the new young preachers. Several preachers, especially the graduates of Darul Mustafa, expressed their admiration and attachment to Habib Umar, either through stories in their sermons or pictures, as you can see from the website in the slide. Some young preachers display the image of Habib Umar and other Yemeni Sayyid scholars in the website and social media page as a way of basking their reflected glory. By connecting themselves to Habib Umar, the preachers might convey three messages to the audience. First, they are students of Habib Umar and have studied with him in Hadramaut. The second one, they are not direct students of Habib Umar, but they have received certificate or ijazah for teaching a subject or practicing particularly litany. The third message that they want to convey They follow the Sunni religious orientation and da'wah path of Habib Umar. By displaying these connections to Habib Umar, preachers, I mean the new preachers, have sought to bolster their profile and attract more participants to their majlis. And then we come to the conclusion. So finally I conclude that the transnational factor contributes to the rising influence of Habaib in Indonesia. I have shown that the political and social change in Yemen that led to the unification of South and North Yemen have paved way for the connection between Indonesia and Hadramaut, especially in the sphere of education and da'wah. Habaib has used the new connections to enhance their influence to Sunni Muslims. They work together with traditionalist scholars in Indonesia in promoting Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or traditionalist Sunni Islam. The last one that I want to say, that reference and mobility to Hadramaut help to strengthen the authority and marketability of new preachers, especially among traditionalist Muslims in Indonesia. Okay, I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Very fascinating talk, very informative. I'm sure that there are a lot of questions. We have, if we stick to the original time, half an hour, so that's quite long. So hopefully we can develop a good discussion. Whom can I give the floor first? In the back. Please briefly state your name, and is there a mic down there or up there, actually? You have a mic, or? Oh, you have that one. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Fatima Hussein from State Islamic University, Sunan, Kalijaga. I have two questions. The first question is that you mentioned about authority several times. So Ismail Fajri Alatas, in his recent book, What is Religious Authority, the title, argued that authority is not something given, but this is something that has to be cultivated. This is something that needs hard work. So I'm wondering, how do you see this in the two Hadramis, namely Habib Umar bin Hafid and Habib Munzir, especially in the age of social media? You did mention some other people who actually try to channel their authority through Habib Umar, but how Habib Umar themselves, himself and Habib Munzir actually try to maintain their authority? Maybe you can give some example. And my second question is, how do you see the emerging authority of female Ba'alawi preachers, female Ba'alawi in contemporary Indonesia? As we know, with the establishment of Darul Zahra after Darul Mustafa, I think back in 2006, more women went to Tarim or Hadramaut in general to study. And then they came back bringing authorities as Hadrami women in contemporary Indonesia. So how do you see this? Because in your presentation you mentioned only two male. So I'm wondering, how do you see the emergence of female Ba'alawi people or preachers in Indonesia? Thank you.
So I suggest we just stick to one question then answer, rather than collecting questions. I think that's we have time enough for that.
Thank you, Bu Fatima, for your interesting questions. Okay, related to the religious authority issue, yeah, I have developed in my my previous work. I mean, usually in Indonesian context, if we are talking about traditionalist Islam, and then the reference must be to Kiai and Habaib. Yeah, Kiai, Kiai and Habaib. But who are the Habaib? Yeah, sometimes we mix between social status and religious authority. When I ask some leaders in Rabita Alawiyah about this, they even complain about the rising young preachers. They say it is very easy for them to claim themselves Habaib. So there is a low value of, they said this is kind of, we can say, commodification of Habaib. In the past, they said it is very hard to be Habib. You have to spend a long time for study, and also you have to show good ethics to society, and then you receive the title Habib. But nowadays, we can see the young preachers. They promote themselves as Habib in social media and so on. So, and then he said that, I mean, the leader of Rabit Alawiyah, he said to me that within the Hadrami communities, it is true that all Habaib is a Sayyid, but not all Sayyids are Habaib. Yeah. So he said to me, you have to distinguish this. So the Habaib here can resemble Kiai, an Indonesian traditionalist Muslim. So therefore, in my study, I just consider Habaib as just a traditionalist authorities in line with Kiai or Tuan Guru in Mataram and in Kalimantan. So in my study, I just consider the Habaib as individual religious authorities, because their preaching movements are not collective. They even compete with each other. And also they marketize their sermon groups with their own branding strategy. So I don't develop critically, I mean deeply the authority that in my study, but in my study I link Habaib with the cultural capital, as Borju has put. So for me, Habib is cultural capital. So if you can maintain the capital by raising Hadramaut and also doing travel to Hadramaut, doing ziarah and so on, it means you are preserving the authority. And also, the Habaib always promote that the true Sunni, the true Sunni Islam is that what they are preaching, yeah, because they are descendants of the Prophet, and they have spread Islam in Indonesia, and they even say that to Jamaah, and they said that if our grandfathers didn't come to Indonesia, you are still Buddhist or Hindus. So this is a kind of preserving the authority of Sayyid scholars. For the second question, unfortunately, I cannot address this because I didn't focus on Ba'lawi female preachers, yeah, due to my focus of my study. So maybe Bu Fatima can develop this in the next research. Thank you.
And anyone want to follow up on this second question, because I think it is an important question?
Not so much related to that issue. Anyone to follow up the question? Okay. Yes, you explained well.
Can you please state your name?
I am Nur Haidi Hassan. Yes. You explained well about the context behind the attempts made by Habaib in Yemen to revive and reconsolidate their identities by establishing Darul Mustafa and other religious institutions. It was related to political conflict in Yemen that led to the division between the north and the south. And the south was controlled by a Marxist socialist regime. Yes, it is pretty clear. But what you didn't explain well, I think, is the context that happened in Indonesia behind the enthusiastic response made by Habib Anis and other Habaib to to support the call for reviving and reconsolidating the Habaib identity by the Habaib in Yemen. I think there must be something happen in Indonesia that encouraged them to follow up what Habaib in Yemen wanted to do. Is it something related to, let's say, state policy toward religion in general, or state policy toward the Habaib, or certain political, economical contestation between the Habaib, or probably also the decreasing opportunities among the Habaib to enjoy their very privilege as the Habaib among Indonesian Muslim. You know, they always enjoy the privilege because Indonesian Muslim like very much to kiss their hands and also to give anything preferable for the Habaib. Or is it also related to the rise of the Salafi networks in Indonesia? You know, the Salafi network in Indonesia established strong connection with the northern Yemen, Ma'arif, Muqbil Ibn Hadi al-Madkhali, who established madrasa in northern Yemen, and then a lot of students of Al-Wadi developed the Salafi Da'wah movement, which have strong orientation to Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, which was, of course, anti-Habaib, yes, in their religious orientation and also political orientation. So, can you explain about that? I'm wondering what kind of determinant factors behind the enthusiastic response made by the Habaib in Indonesia toward the call for reviving the Habaib identity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Nur Hadi. Yeah, I think it's very important question to raise. What I can get from question is that how domestic factor contributes to their rising trend or their rising popularity in Indonesia. And yes, in another part of my study, I also look at specifically to this issue. Yeah, as Indonesian scholars who have studied Islam, I think we have seen that after the Reformation era, there has been a resurgence of many Islamic movements, especially Salafi and so on. And we can say that Salafi is very smart, I mean, developing and in outreaching, I mean, in social media. And this has affected the traditionalist Muslims in Indonesia. And there was a growing concern, there has been a growing concern among traditionalist Muslims after Reformation era, not only within traditionalist Muslim, but also within Sayyid families. Yeah, Sayyid families. They were concerned, or they were worried about Indonesian situation where Salafi took over the social media. Also, they have influence among Hadrami communities, and not only Salafi. Some Sayyid families also worried about their young generation who join Shiism and also Islamic liberalism. So they usually mention three dangers: Salafism, Islamic liberalism, and Shiism. And this is not only specific to Sayyid community, but also within Irshadi community. Even they put in their anggaran, what is that? Anggaran dasar in where they put that this is a worrying situation in Indonesia, and then that's why within Sayyid families they try to preserve their traditions, so that young generations really adopt and follow the path of their predecessors. And this situation also happens within traditionalist Muslims. They feel that the Salafi groups were very powerful in their preaching and social media, and that's why when the Habaib and popular Kiai emerged, and then we can say they get something like a growing market. So what I can say is that there is a need of a traditionalist da'wah after Reformation's era, and I think within NU, within NU, I mean the young preachers from NU didn't really provide, didn't really satisfy the traditionalist Muslims. So when the Habaib came, the returnees from Hadramaut, this is really fulfill their aspirations, because the Habaib always deliver a message to maintain Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Even they refer to one very important book written by Sayyid Muhammad Alwi al-Maliki, where they provide textual, what is that, how to maintain your Aqidah, something like that, how to maintain your Sunni belief from the Salafi attacks. Yeah. So, in other words, there has been commonality between Hadramaut and Indonesia. And then after the coming back of the returnees, I mean the Hadrami Sayyids, that's why we can say they got a market within traditionalist Muslims. So yes, I agree with Prof. Nur Hadi Hasan. There has been a contestation. There has been a contestation within between Salafi and traditionalist Muslim in Indonesia, and that's why Habaib are still important for traditionalist Muslims. But what I can see from their preaching is that they have a commonality with traditional Muslims, but they try also to secure, to promote themselves as the really Sunni gods of Indonesian Islam. And not only Indonesia, but also elsewhere, because they are descendants of the Prophet, and of course they are very close to the Prophet. Yeah, I think, I hope it can answer your questions.
Okay.
Ready.
Other questions? And I still, if people want to follow up on that second question of the previous, yeah. State your name.
Thank you very much. I'm Farid from IIIU. Following Bu Fatma's question on the female Ba'alawi preachers as well. Well, she asked about the authority, but I would like you to give a kind of explanation about this Sharifah with their authority in terms of mobility and mobilization. As you know, the number of female the Sharifah is they simply go to Tarim or Zahra, Dar Zahra as well to learn Islamic studies. And also, if you could just share your experience in digging out this information, very important information basically for the Sharifah, and that would hint our promising female researchers here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Farid. Yeah, I think the female, the Sharifah, yeah, the Sharifah preachers are also important to study, but unfortunately I didn't follow. I didn't make them as one of my my focus. But yeah, maybe because of the, you know, the gender segregations and within the Said families, so it's quite hard to have access to Sharifah. And I think some scholars have written about this issue, like Eva Nisa, who studied a female preacher, I mean Sharifah preacher in Jakarta. I cannot elaborate more about their way of preaching or their authority among young Muslims. But in terms of gender, interestingly, when I attended several sermon groups in Jakarta, many female followers wear chadar, face veil. While face veil in Indonesian context is strongly related to Salafism. So this is very interesting to see that even traditionalist Muslims also wear chadar. So we can see how the impact of Arab culture or Yemeni context also influence the way the followers of female preachers. So they wear black garments, also use chadar. So this is making the Middle Eastern as contested. I mean, Arab is contested. So on the one hand, yeah, usually scholars associate Arab with Wahhabism, Salafism, and so on, but the context of Yemen provide another face of Arabs, where, yeah, it is strongly linked to Sufism and traditionalist Islam in Indonesia. Even though within NU, this practice is not common, but among followers of Habaib, yeah, those who have even attended the sermons, they usually worn such niqab, I think, niqab or chadari. Thank you.
So at least it's a topic worth exploring.
Yeah, I think it's worth exploring for the next.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Martin.
Thank you, Syamsul Rijal. I really enjoyed your talk.
State your name, Martin.
No, I'm Martin van Bruinessen. I want to follow up on Nur Heidi's question on political economy of this development. When we compare the Darul Mustafa da'wah towards Indonesia and Salafi da'wah towards Indonesia, Salafi da'wah has been bankrolled by petrodollars. Yemen is a very poor country. So the question emerges, how is this whole development, this sudden flourishing, the rebuilding, the establishment of Darul Mustafa into a large institution, and then all the scholarships that are given, the emergence of Majlis Rasulullah and all that, there must be someone financing this. Do you have any idea about this? What is the financial power behind this development?
Okay, thanks, Martin, for very good questions. I think this is related to political economy of the popular preachers. I did my research in 2013 in Jakarta and some parts in Indonesia, and I really saw the growing industry of Habaib. And I could feel the competition at the time, competition between, for example, Majlis Rasulullah and Nurul Mustafa in Jakarta. Even the followers also mock each other. So at the time when I interviewed the followers of Majlis Rasulullah, they said to me, if you want to really learn, you have to come to Majlis Rasulullah. But if you want to play or hang out, just hang out with your friends, just go to Nurul Mustafa. So there was a hidden competition between Saman groups at the time, and because they are the two largest Saman groups in Jakarta. In terms of economy, I see that the Habaib are really smart. I mean, in developing social capital, they are really close to the state. Majelis Rasulullah, for example, put at the time the president was Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono was the advisor advisor in the Majelis, and then they annually invite the president to open the Maulid festivals and so on. So when I asked them about this, about why they always invite many senior, state officials, they said that they are very important. First, in order to get permission, they said that it is very hard to get permission in Monash. So you have to have close connection to the state officials. And from this close connection, they also get funding from some senior officials. Some ministers funded their rented building in Jakarta. Also, they provide transportation and so on. And this is from the state relations. They also marketize themselves among traditionalist Muslims in Jakarta. So they open opportunities to those who invited them to give a sermon in their house. And they said there is special fee for that. So they said this is the fee is important because you know that what we are doing is not only a sermon but also musical performance. So they many hosts from traditionalists or fans in Jakarta who invited them to their houses. Even they held sermons, festivals in front of their house, on the streets, and so on. So there are various avenues of their funding, also related to merchandise. Yeah, there are many sources from any directions. So we can say why the industry was really growing at the time, maybe even now, because I haven't updated the situation after 2015. So, yeah.
So you consider money not a main factor, but a side facilitating?
Yeah, I can say that there was contestations, between traditionalists and Salafis, and then there was a growing concern among traditionalist Muslims to maintain their Sunni, traditionalist Sunni faith. But when they do that, they get a market. So, this is not really a market per se, but it began from the growing concern among them, and this becomes industry. Yeah, that's what I say from Martin's question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it's still hypothetical because I have no hard data. But I think Darul Mustafa would not have been possible if there had not been Indonesia. So I think this is a very fascinating example of the periphery, meaning Indonesia, influencing an important new development in the heartlands of Islam. Darul Mustafa, like all activities in Yemen, in Hadramaut at least, was financed by money gained by Hadrami Arabs in Indonesia. When you speak to people in Hadramaut, they say, Indonesia is the dreamt of land of richness, and so it's the richest places where people go to make money. And they send the money home. So Darul Mustafa was really created by the Indonesians. And then it influences again Indonesia and Islam. It's a fascinating interaction.
Yeah, and in fact, the source not only from Indonesia, but also from his former students and relatives in Middle East, like Habib, I forget, Ali Al-Jufri. Yeah, Ali Al-Jufri.
Who come here, you mean?
I mean, he usually help his teacher in Hadramaut, and then he got many donators from, from businessmen in the Middle East.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Let's take two more, something like that.
Yeah, okay. Could I ask a question? Yeah, thank you, Pak Rijal, for your presentation. I am Birawa from IIIU, and I'm wondering whether you have recent data on this one. Well, you mentioned that this Majlis received support from the government in the, especially during the SBY regime, and I wonder whether you know any updated information about the current presidency, because currently I think the engagement between Islam and the current government is heavily contested, and I wonder whether they receive support as well from the current president. And I think it is interesting because when I read your article, most of their followers are lower middle class, lower middle class young people in Jakarta, and I assume that actually they are dislike the current government, and they especially dislike Ahok. And how do these Majlis actually position themselves in trying to receive support from the government and try to mobilize lower middle class supports or followers? Thank you.
An addition to the discussion we just had. Thank you. Any other questions? Christian Lange here, and did I see somebody else or not? Over there, behind the cameras, or not?
Okay, thank you. My name is Ferry from UIII Sunan Kalijaga. I live in Solo, and I know about the Habaib because I'm near from Kliwon Market, Pasar Kliwon. The question is how to identify between Habaib from Sunni, Wahhabi, and Shi'i, because I know that there are two mosques in Pasar Kliwon, Sunni and Shi'i. Yeah. And the second is, what is the reason that the other Habaib, they would not to claim their selfies with Habaib? Thank you.
Okay, I would like to answer a question from Birawa, regarding the politics, the current politics in Indonesia. However, I didn't update my data up to 2015, but by looking back at my situation when I did my research in 2013, I can say that there was diverse groups among Habaib. For some groups, I mean, some groups that the students of Habib Umar in Jakarta try to avoid politics. Yeah, they try to avoid politics. They said that official states are important, but we don't involve in any political parties. They don't support any figures to be a president and so on, and then they welcome any any candidates to come their majlis. This is for Majlis Rasulullah because this is what I hear from their staffs and their followers. But in other majlis, yeah, they are clearly support candidates at the time, especially Prabowo and so on. Like Nurul Mustafa, he was really close to Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono's majlis at the time. And then Majelis Nurul Mustafa always, some of their preachers often give a sermon within Prabowo's Prabowo's religious activities. So yeah, there is a diverse political affiliation in terms of politics. They are really smart. I mean, many of preachers in Jakarta, they said that they open space for all candidates to come. Yeah, and this is the benefit. So every candidates come to their majlis, they give donation and so on, and then in front of their followers, they said, kita doakan, let's pray to the next candidate so that he can win the elections. And then another candidates come to the majlis as well, and then, okay, let's pray for the next candidate. So it's not really, I think it is diverse, so we cannot say that all Habaib support for any political candidates and so on. Yeah, because of the diversity of the summer groups. Yeah, but of course the exception is Front Pembela Islam. I think that's another story because it was very political from the outset. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last question is for Christian.
Oh yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, the second question, okay, relating to how to distinguish between Sunni Habaib and the Shi'i one. I think Shi'i Habaib in Indonesia, they don't declare themselves as Shi'i in publics. Yeah. For example, Ahlul Bait Indonesia in Jakarta. Yeah. The leader is I forget I forget his names. He's a close friend of Habib Rizik. Yeah. Habib Rizik. He said that Habib Rizik, I mean from the Front Pembela Islam in Jakarta, was the fan of Imam Khomeini in the beginning. But after that, he realized that Khomeini is Shia, and then he left Imam Khomeini. So the Shia Habaib, they don't declare, they don't put, they don't show up as they don't try to declare themselves as Shia, of course, because this is very sensitive. Yeah, because there is a growing concern among Habaib to protect Sunnism. Even they said that the basic characteristic of Habaib is Sunnism, even though the history didn't say that. I mean, yeah, if we read the history where many Shia ulama came to Indonesia, according to Farid Alatas, for example, he said that many Shiite preachers were responsible for Islamization in the early history. So I think it depends how to distinguish. I think it is very easy to distinguish, yeah, between Shia and Sunni Habaib. If Habaib always talk about Fatima and Hussein and so on, of course this will be affiliated with Shiism. I hope it can answer your questions. Even though now the Shia is everywhere. I mean, in Jakarta there is Ahlul Bait Indonesia, and also in Solo, you mentioned about Solo. There are Shia, Habaib, and so on. Yeah, sorry, I cannot develop more about this issue. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Do we do one last question then, Christian? Yeah.
Thank you. I can try to be brief. Christian Lange from Utrecht. I wanted to ask something about one of the slides that you showed us, on which there was a quote about Habib Omar, according to which he had learned 100,000 ahadith by heart and taught them to others. Now, I guess this could be an exaggeration, but you know, if we assume that it is true, and if someone manages to learn 10 akhbar a day with the sanad, maybe over the course of 30 years or so, he can memorize 100,000 traditions. But what I'm interested in is that if you look at the Kutub as-Sitta, I think, I don't know if anybody has actually counted, but I think if you count every tradition individually, you get up to maybe 50,000, and there's a lot of overlap, so it's probably less, maybe 30,000. So I'm wondering if you can say something about where the other 70,000 traditions are coming from, whether there are any, whether you know, I don't know the curriculum of the Dar al-Mustafa, what kind of hadith collections are popular there, in addition perhaps to the Kutub as-Sitta. Is there a notion of Sunni canon in the Dar al-Mustafa, and how does that translate into the Indonesian context? Thank you.
Okay, Pak Christian, unfortunately I didn't come from Islamic Studies department. I studied at Political and Social Change, so I didn't do deep investigation on their classical Islamic teaching in Hadramaut. I even didn't visit Hadramaut because of the political situation in 2015. Yeah? So that's the problem. So I didn't try to see their classical textual reference, but I only see how the followers portray the Habib Umar. So I don't know whether this is true or not. This is not important for me, because this is just to show that how the followers construct, how they perceive their gurus. So yeah, because you know the manakib style is, yeah, there is exaggeration on this issue, and I don't know whether Habib Umar really memorized 100,000 hadith or not. But in fact, many followers of him always mention him as Al-Musnid in the flyer and in billboard and so on. Al-Musnid, Al-Habib, and yeah, many phrases and many titles and so on, just to show. I think this is also a kind of reclaiming, yeah, to borrow Sunarjo's title yesterday, reclaiming the traditional Islamic authority, and the preachers always emphasize the sanad system. The sanad system, even though, yeah, this is, even though we know that this kind of sanad is, I don't know, declining, I don't know, in traditional pesantren at the moment, but the Habaib always emphasize the importance of sanad. And they said, the Salafi, they don't have sanad. But for us, we have very strong sanad until to the Prophet Muhammad. And they display the name of their gurus until the Prophet Muhammad. So this is really convincing to the followers of the Habaib, even though in urban context. Yeah.
Again, back to authority, the first question we had. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rijal. Thank you, audience, for your attention and questions. We resume, quarter two, but a little bit later, but let's say quarter two, then probably everybody is here before 3. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me. I can't. I don't have audio.
Of secularity and religiosity among young Muslim intellectuals in Indonesia, particularly on debates on the limits of religious freedom. Connected to her work on material culture of religion, she has edited in 2021 with Ramona Jelinek-Menke a volume entitled Handling Religious Things, the Material and the Social in Museums. Since 2018, she is a spokesperson of the interdisciplinary research network Dynamics of Religious Things in Museums, founded by the German Ministry of Research and Education. She based on her studies on religious diversity in different cultures, she has published a good number of monographs and articles, among which in 2014 Religiöse Minderheiten und gesellschaftlicher Wandel, and in 2012 Einheit in der Vielfalt, Strukturen, Bedingungen und Alltag religiöser Pluralität in Indonesien. Moreover, Professor Edith Franke is co-editor of Journal for Study of Religions and Marburg Journal of Religions, and member of the editorial board of different book series. And today she's going to talk about a particular figure of the wayang, the Javanese shadow theater performances, which, a number of us know very much about the topic. Others, like me, have recently come into contact with this form, but it's a very interesting topic, particularly because she's going to look at the possibilities that this gives for innovation in religion. So, Professor Edith Franke, it is a pleasure having you here with us, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction and the invitation to give a lecture at this summer school. I have listened to the previous lecture with great interest, and I will bring in a quite different aspect to the topic of the summer school by talking about the contribution of the study of material culture to the understanding of the mobilization of religion and Islam. I very much regret that I will not be able to attend in person due to my obligations at my university. In this first, no longer Corona-determined semester, it was unfortunately not possible for me to be away from Marburg for an extended period of time and such a long journey. I very much hope that I will be able to travel again to Java, perhaps next year. I would also like to express my sincere thanks for allowing me to join you online. I miss not being able to meet you in person, but at least a little exchange will be possible at that way now too. I hope that you can understand me well and that the presentation is clearly visible. Let me know if there are any problems. I would like to start my talk with a few words about the context of what I'm going to present today. Monica already mentioned some aspects. As a scholar of the study of religions, my research is concerned with the relationship between religion and society, also religion and gender, and with the changing nature of religions and religious diversity in the present. Against this background, I have dealt with the change of religious ideas and practices in connection with processes of social change, as well with new social forms of religion in Germany and Europe first. And I'm interested in processes of migration and mediatization on the rise, and therefore new questions about the pluralization of social and religious life worlds have increasingly come into focus. Dealing with religious, also intra-religious diversity is also an important topic and raises new questions about the interactions and entanglements of religious traditions. Since the beginning of the 2000s, I have also repeatedly studied Indonesia's religious culture, particularly the connection between historical, social, and political conditions, and the positioning and development of the different religions. Besides the social regulations of religious plurality, I am particularly interested in the changes in the lived forms of religion. How do people practice their religion? Which religious ideas are relevant to them? What influences and interconnections can be identified between global development and local traditions? And what is the relationship between scriptural religion, dogmas, dominant theology, and local variants and individually lived religion? From the perspective of the study of religions, there is neither the one religion nor a pure original religion that is independent of social and political factors. Religions are always in a process of change in which the perspective, existing religions and theological concepts and norms are transformed, further developed, and also called into question. This is the situation, as is the normal case in the history of religion. It is obvious that these developments are accompanied by disputes and conflicts about the power of interpretations and religious contents. This relates to the selection and interpretation of textual sources, as well to theological debates about normativity and heterodoxy within religions. It also has an impact on the determination of relationships between religions in my research, between religions. In my research, I'm interested in the factors that trigger processes of religious change or are the starting point for dynamics and mobilization of religions. To investigate these processes, I have often worked with ethnographic approaches to examine the connection between individual religious ideas and theological dogmas, the position and formation of religious minorities, and the relationship between non-conform religious traditions and religious norms. For some years now, as you have already heard, my methodological and theoretical tools have been supplemented by a focus on researching the material culture of religion, because I'm convinced it is precisely in this that indications of transformation processes, of new developments, and also of transversal contents and forms of lived religion become apparent. For this conference, I have made it my task to introduce the approach of material religion in more detail and to explain it with the help of some examples. I will then first refer to two examples from the Christian tradition in Europe and then turn to the Javanese Wayang as a factor in the mobilization of Indonesian Islam. Although I cannot do this comprehensively and against the background of longer studies, I hope to stimulate more attention to the importance of researching religious materials and to pursue this in further studies. My outline. As I have explained, I will first make some basic remarks, theoretical and methodological reflections on the relevance of material culture, and then explain why things matter in religions and the mobilization of religion. In another section, I will follow some examples for presenting some reflections on processes of demonization in Islam in Java. Finally, there will be reflections on religious materials as space for inner-religious diversification and innovation. The material culture of religion, religious things, or as you can say, also religious materials, play an important role in marking belonging to a religious community and in conveying religious content. This includes, for example, food regulations that distinguish one religious community from another, such as not eating beef in the Hindu tradition, refraining from pork in Islam, or abstaining from all meat consumption among the Jaina. Dress codes, which can be an expression of affiliation and also belonging to or having a specific religious status, are also part of this. Ascetics, monks, nuns, as well as religious specialists, can be recognized by features of their clothing, color, material, and style. But all the procedures and structures of ritual acts, like liturgies or prayer postures, religiously or sacral connoted rooms like temples, church, and mosques, as well as objects used for the ritual acts or as symbolizations of transcendence, Images of saints up to figures of gods belong to the material culture of religion. In addition to traditional texts and their interpretations, they play a central role in the transmission and communication of religious content. They convey religious messages and make them tangible, even sensual and emotional. The prostration in Buddhist or Islamic prayer, the cross for the Christian message of the forgiveness of all sins through the death of Jesus on the cross, the Buddha with the gesture of fearlessness as a promise of protection, the many-armed figure of the dancing god Shiva Nataraja, who represents the rhythm and sacred order of the world, the kashkul, the alms bowl of the Sufi wandering dervish, which stands for the ascetic spiritual way of life and the search for God, or a scroll painting with the Japanese goddess Amaterasu. You see them on the slide. They are all religious materials, and they allow access to religious contents with different senses, which does not require knowledge of religious scriptures or theological dogmas. They are religious materials that bring religious identification close and establish structure and belonging to a religious group. Birgit Meyer and others said that things are objects of body's apprehension, but they are also agencies within themselves, either as other bodies or as the extension or completion of a body, or as a presence or symbol of a social bodies. Things are exchanged and circulate, bearing values and powers that structure human relations. And therefore, the material study of religion concentrates on what bodies and things do, on the practices that put them to work, on the epistemological and aesthetic paradigms that organize the bodily experience of things, hierarchizing sensations and media, all within the network of relations that makes the sacred a social reality. What then does it mean to study the material culture of religion? It means, so Birgit Meyer, to focus one's investigation on the evidence and insight offered by bodies, things, places, and practices. So the starting point of my consideration is that in the material testimonies of religions, religious ideas are not only stored and transferred, but that they also offer a space for individualized and also non-conformist interpretations and approaches. Thus, the material culture of religion is, so my thesis, place and medium for the dynamisation and diversification of religion. The perspective of the material study of religion assumes that things are not just things. They are not separate to culture or social relations, but are an integrated part of them. They are a key player within which people's lives and worlds are mutually created. And this is also the same in religions. The field of material culture studies, developed in the 1980s, strives to explore ethnographically the ways in which people and things are co-constituted in different settings. The phrase material culture serves to bring together culture and the material, and therefore challenges the idea that culture is either just symbolic or that it is a separate sphere to the material world. Instead, in taking a material culture approach, you are committed to exploring how culture or religion is materialized in different contexts. Research on material culture refers to what the properties and capacities of things and materials are, and how these can lead to objects having or produce particular effects. For the religion-related research, this means a focus on the question of how religious materials and things can dynamize and mobilize religions. The disciplines of cultural studies have taken a turn and increasingly focusing on the study of the material. As a result, the material dimension of religion and religious things have also become an important focus of research, and my field, the study of religion, comparative studies of religions. For a long time, it was not all clear whether there was such a thing as religious materials. The early Protestant-influenced study of religions in Europe conceived of religion as an exclusively immaterial spiritual matter, as a matter of faith, that was researched primarily through the philological analysis of written sources. The ritual handling of things and the material expressions of transcendence experienced by believers and practitioners as opposed to religion were then often devalued as superstition, fetishism, or magic. The material approach emphasizes that religions are not just beliefs and ideas, but highlights the inseparable connection between religion and material things. In the course of material turn, the concept of religion thus undergoes a double expansion. On the one hand, what did not have this status because of its material aspects is now subsumed under the category of religion. On the other hand, it is recognized that what was and is considered religion is always closely interwoven with the material. Even if the importance of materiality is denied for religious or other reasons, believers dress with certain types of clothes, practitioners use things in rituals, or gather in buildings made of different materials, and the very existence of religions leaves material traces, all of which can be made the subject of analysis. Perhaps the interest in religious things and religious material culture is so great because the world determined by social media and internet is experienced as volatile, as fleeting and not very stable. Sometimes the material things are even the only witnesses of their past existence. By focusing on the materiality of religion, the approach also takes into account the dynamic potential of things. Thus express non-verbal bodily dimensions of religious experience and that can host content that goes beyond the message of the textual traditions that have been handed down. By making not only canonized texts, but all the material products the object of research, not only the religion of established elites comes into view, but also popular religion, and thus also social groups and religions that are not primarily based on scriptures. They are increasingly perceived and their significance is recognized. The preoccupation with materiality can thus develop a critical potential vis-à-vis established patterns in research and in the religions. I'm therefore interested in religious things, their role and function, as well as their effects on religious developments and transformation processes. Follow the objects. The methodological approach is captured by the concept of follow the objects. That means explore the biography of objects, their materials, and their relations. The approach of material studies assumes that objects, like persons, have social lives, as Appadurai said in 1986 already. Understanding these social lives can allow insights in the objects themselves, as well as the social and the religious worlds they move through. Understanding the social life of things involves both a temporal dimension, as objects change values over different periods of time, and as well as a spatial dimension, as the values of things arise from different spaces and cultural context. An approach which follows the lives of things seeks to understand how the materials, how the meaning and vitalities of things are not just derived from how things move or the context in which people use them. An openness is needed, including what material practice are. Consider that objects are already a part of a setting. So you have to pay attention to what people do with things, explore how things are experienced, understood, and used differently upon the capacities of the bodies using them. It needs to take into account the social and religious context as well as the skills and knowledge that are brought to bear. I now will illustrate this by two examples from the Christian tradition first, and then turn to the example of Japanese wayang and the reception of Sema. This pearl bracelet, also called the pearls of faith or pearls of life, or frälsarkrans, literally life belt in Swedish, was conceived in 1995 by Martin Lönnebo, a bishop of the Swedish Church. He called it an training equipment for the soul, or a catechism for the hands. The Pearls of Life have enjoyed great popularity ever since, and not only in Sweden. According to the website of the Swedish Church, more than 30% of the parishes now use this Frälsarkrans or Pearls of Faith in their work. When asked about the background to the development of the pearl ribbon, Martin Lönnebo replied that he had been looking for something that would help today's rushed person to approach their inner life. In addition, the rosary should, in a fearless way, he said, summarize and convey the core of the Christian faith, and beyond that, be something concrete that one can take into one's hand. He had thought about a tool for the spiritual longing of the people, which in the form of prayer makes encounter with God and the experience of a touch possible. With this introduction of the pearl ribbon into the Protestant tradition, Lönnebo wanted to continue the practices known in other religions and enable a tangible, concrete practice of spirituality, which wasn't known up to then in Protestant tradition, and that should help to concentrate inwardly and focus on God. If one looks only on the names of the pearls I've written on the right side of this slide, apart from the baptism pearl and the resurrection pearl, no other can be clearly assigned exclusively to Christian faith. Only the desert pearl comes close to biblical symbolism. All other names, the pearl of silence, the eye pearl, the serenity pearl, the pearls of love, the mystery pearls, and the night pearl are so openly formulated that they generally take up human themes and questions of life, which can be interpreted both religiously and without being fixed on a particular denomination, and also secularly. Also, the pearl of God allows the classification into beliefs of different religions. The pearls of faith are closely associated with the path of life of people. An implementation in the form of a concrete, walkable pilgrim's way is therefore obvious. And you see a part of a meditation place in Sweden, which was inaugurated as a kind of walk-in pearls of life. So you can walk from stone to stone and to recite or to contemplate about these topics. This introduction of the pearls of life into Protestant religious practice indicates a need for a more contemplative, less dogmatic, and more haptic religious practice. At the same time, it seems to express a tendency towards an, I call it, internalization of the Christian tradition. You know this form of rosaries in very different religious traditions, like the Hindu tradition, Buddhist tradition, the Catholic tradition, and also Islam. This is possibly a reaction to the desires and needs of younger people who encounter many cultures, both when traveling and on the internet, and who are looking for an integrative religious practice. The example of the pearls of faith shows the potential of material religion to expand theological dogmas and established religions with new aspects. Second example. A different example from the wide range of religious material in the Christian tradition is the Heilige Kümmernis, also known as Liberta, Vilge Fortis, and Sankt Ankamba, depending on the region from the Catholic tradition. According to the legends of this bearded woman at the cross, is found in texts from the early 16th century in Middle Europe. A young woman was a pagan princess who had converted to Christianity. When her father tried to force her to marry, she refused and prayed for a way out. God answered her plea, and she grew a beard. Her enraged father ordered her to be crucified. Then, as a saint who was called upon in times of sorrow and adversity, the Kümmernis underwent periods of strong devotion. Numerous pictorial representations, sculptures, votive images, and prayer cards attest a great popularity and widespread appeal in various regions of medieval Europe, On the left side, you see St. Ancamba in Austria, in a Catholic museum in Graz. And on the right side, you see an oil painting from the 17th century from a monastery of nuns in south part of Germany. After her legend and veneration had spread steadily from Flandern to southern Germany from the early 15th century and on, she was included in what is called the Roman Martyrs Register in 1583. But she was increasingly forgotten in the 19th century. Since 1981, various originals and reproduction of this motif have been displayed in the Museum of Religions at my university, a museum for which I'm responsible as a director. These objects originate from very different periods and regions, include and also include variants of the so-called Christus triumphans. This is a symbolization of Christus in not in a suffering way, but as in a triumphant way. This collection of the Kümmernis is therefore a historical testimony and preservation of lesser known, deviant and non-conform Christian movements beyond the mainstream. The depiction of this St. Ancamba function quite often as a stimulus or catalyst for new interpretation of Christian ideas. So we can see that feminist theologians and LGBTQ movements discover her as a powerful symbol, and in feminist theology, the bearded woman on the cross is seen as an expression of Christian message of redemption that breaks through the traditional normative categories of gender. There is a Swedish performance studio named Vilgefortis, for example, which equips women and other people, as they say on their website, with beards at Pride Parade, and they refer to this symbol as a kind of empowerment. This Ancamba or Vilgefortis in the exhibition of the museum in Marburg provokes frequent questions and irritations among visitors. The confrontation with a previously unknown and unexpected iconography of a Christian figure stimulates reflection on one's own understanding of religion and the expectancies of the visitors. The historical St. Ancamba proves to be not only a place for preservation of religious tradition that might otherwise have been forgotten, but it also provides an opportunity for revision of knowledge about the history of religion and also for very new religious interpretations. So religious things thus become a place of negotiation about the plausibility, scope, and acceptance of religious ideas, since it's up to the believers and religious practitioners to decide what is represented as a part of their lived Christian traditions and what is not. Now I come to my third example, Javanese shadow theater and the figure of Sema as an element of demonization and mobilization of Islam. The shadow theater Wayang has connected the local mystically oriented Hindu Javanese tradition of Java with Islam since the 15th century and was obviously a suitable medium for spreading Islamic teaching and norms in Javanese society, making them popular and accessible. So Hidayatullah in 2021. The Wayang performances thereby also function as a central place of social encounters, but also for religious identification and as a mediator of religious contact. With the integration of Islamic stories, and especially with the introduction of the Puna Kawan in the 15th, 16th century, who act as helpers and mediators between the Hindu deities and the humans, bring in Islamic values and messages. The local mystically influenced Javanese culture of Kejawan so was connected with the newly added teachings of Islam. Sema's introduction into the dramaturgy of the shadow theater perfectly goes back to Sultan Agung of Jakarta, the ruler of the Islamic kingdom of Mataram. He gave the Dalang, the Wayang puppeteer, via Sema and his sons, you see on the right side on this slide, the power to comment on the events of the Hindu epics, to insert questions and to comment on current events, and thus provided a means to introduce Islam via the Hindu-orientated Wayang. All the Puna Kavan, and especially Semar as the oldest one, are described and act as servants, but they are also seen as spiritual guides. And as Mark Woodward sums up, in reality, they are Deva who have been given the task of regulating human affairs. Clifford Geer's characterizes Semar as the only one who has the courage to stand against the apparently inevitable cause of the epic, the Hindu epics, to protest the utterances of the gods, or to change or force events. That said, his stabilization and productive role in the midst of a hopeless situation is not, however, the result of cultivated rigor, but of humor. And this is the classical role of a trickster, of a popular culture hero. In doing so, Semar proves to be wise, knowing, and at the same time approachable for the audience. The Puna Kavan, as short, fat, and grotesque companions of heroes, appear to have a long tradition in Java. They were already mentioned in connection with the court officials in inscription on copper plates dating to 840. And you find all the representations of this kind of Puna Kavan on stone reliefs, such as on the Buddhist Borobudur that date to the 9th or 10th centuries. But Semar appears to be more than a simple clown or trickster. The idea that Semar was long considered a god is witnessed in the fact there exists a temple on the Yang Plateau named Chandi Semar that carries his name. Semar's paradoxal presence as clown and wise man, servant, spiritual guide, and last but not least, representation of the absolute, unites superficially incompatible opposites, and therefore stands for the mystical unification of all opposites and of man and God. Woodward describes his paradoxical appearance as the union of servant and Lord, of the unity of humanity with respect to Allah, and thus the inner meaning of Islam. Among others, Lilek Adelina Suharjono in 2016 sees Wayang as a medium to spread Islamic teaching while holding at the same time still fundamental Javanese values. She demonstrates that it was especially the Sultan of Demak who used Wayang performances as dawah event at the celebration of Maulud Nabi Muhammad on the veranda of the Demak Mosque. Visitors of the Wayang performances were required to fill Islamic rituals, like cleaning the bodies, recite Islamic confession, etc. So that the initial motivation of these people being entertained by Wayang performance was combined with a request to perform Islamic rituals. Suharjono emphasizes that the dynamics of Wayang goes in two directions. It was not just the Wayang which adapted itself to Islamic norms, but also the other way around, that Islam also customized the teaching so that it fits with the Javanese Wayang tradition. However, Wayang Kulit remains a living tradition in Javanese society, and therefore it can still change in the future as any new stimulus is absorbed. So Semar can be seen as an example of a genuine popularized image of sacredness that provides significant room for non-compliant religious concepts and practices, and a bridge between concepts of normative Sunni Islam and Javanese mysticism. Lani Probojo in 2008 went so far to call Semar a tangible Allah. This blending of local religious traditions with Islam was and continues to be also critically by Sunni Muslims. Suharjono describes justifications to legitimize Semar's character and his representation of mysticism. One of the attempts is to combine the calligraphic letters of Allah, Prophet Muhammad, and the 5 pillars of Islam to Semar's body, as you can see on this picture in her paper. This demonstrates how strong the presence and influence of material culture and religious things can be, and that they show changing influences or even divergent possibilities of interpretation, and to connect different interpretations of religious messages. Yeah, you may know some of this. In Java, images of Semar, not only as classical Wayang figure, but also in the form of calligraphy in old Javanese or Arabic scripture, continue to be popular. They can be purchased as sacred clothes, and on the website it said, presenting the holy image of Semar, the spiritual ancestor of Java, or in form of stickers, decals, and keychains. For me, they are indications of the broad popularity and reception of this figure and its inherent content, even in partly secular context. Semar application in various forms and in the form of calligraphy could be interpreted as a clear indication of his perception as tangible Allah. Mark Woodward sees in Semar a wali who appears as a defender of normative piety. I come to my conclusion. In the history of religion, there are many examples of religious things that have been used and employed for the spread, adaptation, and popularization of new religious traditions. They are particularly appropriate as mediating tools, as they allow space for diverse interpretations and, moreover, emotional, intuitive access. Even as in the example of the Sankt Ankamba, they can bring new perspectives to existing religious traditions. The Pearls of Life made evident that through the introduction and use of new religious materials, a change in popularization and higher acceptance, as well as a low threshold, facilitated communication of religious context can be achieved, which probably would not be possible via lectures or theological writings alone. The Sankt Ankamba also shows that little-known historical traditions are preserved in religious objects, and that these can be a starting point and inspiration for new interpretations and religious practices. The Javanese shadow theater and the figure of Semar show how religious materials have succeeded in spreading and popularizing religious contents, and that they are a medium that contributes to the dynamization of lived Islam and thus can also integrate the changes of a globalized and mediatized world. The effect goes in both directions: a change and adaptation of Islamic practice to new developments, but also the transmission of traditional values by bringing them into the interaction of the Semar by the puppeteer, who speaks for Semar, and thus making them accessible to the audience. Religious materials are thus a fruitful field to explore the inclusion and entanglement of different religious traditions, and also the transformation of religion in different social, historical contexts, and also inwards of religious traditions. The mediation of religious traditions through religious things have a significance that goes beyond words and writing, especially because emotional, social, and intuitive areas of experience are addressed, which can maybe open a space for a strong attachment to transcendence or to God. I would be very curious to see more research on the perception of Wayang from the perspective of contemporary Muslims. Thank you for listening and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Franke, for your wonderful presentation, a very interesting one. So I'm sure that there are a number of questions. Yeah.
Maybe you can hear me, but for me, I can't hear anything from your side in Indonesia. So hopefully it will work.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Professor Franke? No.
I think not.
I can't. Unfortunately, I can't.
It's working now?
Maybe.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, now I hear a voice. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Theo Sunier. Thank you very much, Professor Franke, for this fascinating talk. I have two questions. One is, what would you say about the research agenda, a comparative research agenda on material religion? I mean, in what direction would you think is most important to go? And the other question is, the new forms, material forms of religious mediation, if we follow Birgit Meijer take on that. Many of these forms are contested. I mean, in the beginning, they have a hegemonic status, and then there is resistance, and then only after time you see that these new forms are being accepted or applied. So can you say a bit more about the contested nature of new material forms? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. First, to your first question, the connection of gender and material and research on material culture. I have shortly mentioned that I came from a research method which refers to oral history research or qualitative social methods like interviewing, fieldwork, etc., etc. And that was for me very important to learn about those traditions and religious practices which are not written down in the normative text and authorized text. And as I came to be responsible for this museum, and I have to deal with a lot of objects in my work at the university, it was very convincing for me that also in material testimonies is a rich source for seeing or finding traditions which are not which preserve religious practices and religious concepts which are not written down in text. So especially paying attention to the material aspect of religion, and not only religious things, but also performing rituals, etc., has a strong meaning for learning about gender relations. Because in many traditions, it's the women who are not yet in dominant established positions as religious authorities, but they are the ones who educate the children, who educate the children in their religious tradition, and also are often very enthusiastic believers and practitioners. And so this approach enables us to learn about more of this side, which is has been often neglected. That's one point. And your second question, you talked about the contested status of new materials. I'm not quite sure if I understand you completely right, but I first would say that every new material or every material object, like also text, is contested by a is contested during the time, during history. So we can see that concepts and rituals are preserved in the material culture, but as we have seen, as the uncumber, it's almost forgotten. Yeah, and then hundreds of years later, people come and see this object and say, "We want to do." So it's convincing for them, this expression or this object carries for them and convincing religious contact, and so they begin to develop a new interpretation, a new practice with this object. It's often different from the historical background. So new is something which becomes old-fashioned in a very short time, but I think it's the same with every testimonies of religious traditions. I hope you can
Karen.
hear me. Okay, there you are again.
Dear Professor Franke, she disappeared, but well,
I'm still here.
Thank you very much for this very interesting lecture. I went yesterday evening to the museum Doyo and attended a Wayang Kulit performance there. And I was wondering, what I knew about Wayang Kulit was that you look at the shadow side of it and not at the back side. But in this performance, the audience, most of the audience was sitting at the back side of the screen, and there was only a small part at the, well, shadow side of the screen. Is this a new development in the sense of it's an adaptation to tourism? In context of that, I saw that the audience was consisting of native Indonesian people and Western tourists. I don't know whether these Indonesian people were also tourists from other areas of Indonesia, but I was wondering, is this for them a tradition that is still alive? Is it something that that has new elements that relate to contemporary situations? Or, is it, I got the impression that the performance I saw was quite traditional and not having any contemporary or topical issues. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting aspects you mentioned. Thank you for your questions. I try to get all points. So when I have been for my first time in Indonesia about 15 or 20 years ago, a friend and colleague from the UIII in Jakarta invited me to join Wayang Theater. And it was obvious that this performance, it was at Prambanan in central Java, you know, was more for tourists and an audience who paid entrance, and it was in a very, quite static form. There was the stage, and it was performed in a time frame which was compatible for visitors joining it just for 2 or 3 hours. But I recognize that not only me and other tourists or visitors from abroad, but also a lot of Javanese or Indonesian people visited with high empathic attachment. And then over the years, I visited a lot of Wayang performances, and also my language school performed a little Wayang theater at the end of the course. And I visited Wayang performances during the Javanese Holy Nights at the beach of Parangkusumo, etc. And I have experienced that beyond these more official forms of Wayang at Prambanan, you always could go around the screen. And also in the last time in 2013, I visited a Wayang performance in Jakarta. It was obviously clear that you could watch from both sides of the screen, because the puppeteer, the Dalang, and the gamelan orchestra accompanying this performance is also very, very important. And so when it lasts about hours and hours, and usually if it's a real traditional form, it lasts about a lot of hours, people walk around, take a nap and visit again, etc. So it is a very dynamic process. And of course, these Wayang performances are both. They are entertainment, they are nice event to meet people, but they are at the same time, you can feel a very spiritual atmosphere. And a lot of people I talked with told me that for them, it's religious practice to visit these wayang performances. And I should do more research, and some Indonesian scholars have done it on these different forms of wayang. I visited also a Christian wayang performance in Salatiga, which introduced Christian figures in the performance. So it is still live and changing. And 2 days ago, I read a text that there's also a wayang hip hop. So it seems to be something, and that's what Sunarjo says, is something which is popular and is, yeah, how can I say, continuing, yeah, developed and changed. Yeah.
So, Karin has a question.
Thank you very much. My name is Karen van Nieuwkerk from Radboud University. Can you hear me?
A little bit louder would be perfect.
Okay, I will try.
Yeah, that's better.
Thank you very much for your interesting lecture. I found it very inspiring also to think about material culture and material goods and objects as a way to study changes in religion, dynamisation of religion, individualization of religion, and also alternative non-conformist interpretations. So I really find it inspiring and also convincing, but I was also thinking many anthropologists would argue that also ritual would be a prime lens to study those aspects. Yeah. So could you perhaps elaborate a little bit more why material culture or material objects are an even better way to study those processes? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for this question. It gives me the chance to explain it a little bit better than I have done it in my lecture. Obviously, I wouldn't say that studying religious objects is better or more convincing or a richer field. I follow a wide understanding of material culture of religion, and that includes also rituals like the prayer, and pay attention to the bodily experience, all the gestures and attitudes towards a prayer. That's as important as looking as one object, for example, as the Ma or the Sant and Kamba. It is a little bit influenced by my research project of the last 4 years, which focused on religious objects in museums and their presentations, that I this time focused on religious objects, and they are important, but indeed it's not to separate from other material aspects, for example, like the rooms or also the liturgies, etc.
Are there other questions? Yes, they're on the back. Two questions.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Franke, for your very interesting presentations. My name is Sarah Mwahida. I'm teaching at University of Edinburgh. I'd like to, actually my questions is also quite similar with Karen. It's about the individualizations and also the non-conformist interpretations, you know, on maybe not exactly material cultures, but the stories that also accompany it. I think I will talk a little bit about example, but I will say my question is actually, you know, because there are so many individualizations and there are so many modification of narratives, and sometimes we cannot actually trace the origin, because sometimes it's also tied with power play, it's tied with like orthodoxizations. So in one thing, like my research, for instance, I'm collecting maybe stories that are minoritized, stories that already erased, but sometimes because of its erase, it survived, and maybe during the resistance, they actually how do you call it, grow up or modified to different stories. So I think my question is, how do you actually curate or select which stories that actually good, or which stories that may be interesting and related, but you don't know if it sounds like so fanciful, maybe there is no veracity, but this is something that influential for the community, for their oral history, for their construction of identity. It's just because sometimes like maybe you don't talk it as history, but more like oral history or memory. But you know, sometimes when we kind of like collecting stories that are quote unquote too wild, maybe it also can make our research sounds unconvincing. For instance, and I want to make it example because this is also related to Semar. I don't know if you know this story. It's about Semar and Togok meeting with the Sheikh Subakir. The story is one version in Jangka Jayabaya, and also it is written in one version of Kitab Musarar Syekh Subakir. So some people say that this is actually related to the Islamization of Java. So the story said that the Sheikh met Semar and make a promise. Semar say that you can Islamize Java, but you cannot erase all the cultures. That's his, he gave permissions. And then the Sheikh said that, okay. So there is like some manuscript that say that, but this is only one version among many versions. And now this Sheikh, that some people say that they're Persians, or he is actually from Rome. Now with the revival, if I can say that, on Shiism, some people actually interpret this as Muhammad al-Baqir, the fifth Imam of Shi. So there is like different layers of interpretations, and some Sunni Ustad even like tell it, you know, in their YouTube channel. So this new story actually spread out, and even there is rituals that come with it, because there is a prayer that come with the Sheikh who kind of like Islamized Java and actually met Semar. So what I'm saying is it's a very interesting story, but sometimes I feel like, so should I include this, and how to make this story actually taken seriously? Yeah, thank you. Sorry it is taking so long.
No. It's very interesting. Unfortunately, I didn't know this story before, and I listened to you with great interest. Yeah, what you mentioned is that the stories told on religious interpretations, or the story about Semar, have a wide range of variations. Yeah, and that corresponds to the fact that what religion is clearly shaped and influenced by what people are doing and saying about it. Yeah. So you have different reading traditions of Quranic surah, and you have different interpretations of the Sant Ankamba or of Semar. And especially in the Wayang performances, you have the puppeteer, the Dalang, who has the possibility to interpret and to give his words into the Wayang figures. So there is a strong, I would say, influence of the people performing the Wayang or seeing the Wayang, what they do with all these stories. That, so, you know, I'm a scholar in the comparative study of religions, and I can't treat this in another way than recognizing that there are very different interpretations, narrations, and also symbolizations of what people think about their religious tradition. And so it's up to the people who see the Wayang theater, or up to the ones who read a text or hear an interpretation of a text. They have to reflect what they think is appropriate to their understanding of the religious message of Islam or of the Christian tradition. And then we come at once to the question of religious authority. Who has the authority to give an accepted or a normative interpretation? Yeah, and also the material culture is not free from this. Yeah, which interpretation and which content is accepted, is convincing or not. So it leaves us as scholars and also the practitioners back with the question to decide and to reflect what is appropriate to their religious interpretation. I hope I could a little bit answer your question.
There are other questions? Yes. One more there.
Is that me?
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Okay.
You was already, right?
Yeah,
Before
yeah. Okay. I'm Nur Hidayah, and I am interested on your cultural materialisms. If you are really familiar with the name that I mentioned, it like Marvin Harris, Julian Stewart, and Leslie White that working also in cultural materialism, they see that cultural materialism influenced religions in many ways. But in the position that you are standing here, I see that religions is working more hard to influence the symbol of cultural materialisms as a symbol of religious. Is that true, or do you think that the cultural materialism that influenced the religion itself, or the religious that help a cultural materialism to making it exist as a symbol of the sacred and bringing the connection between intuition and emotion to the abstract intuition in religious pious? I think that's all my question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think there is a close entanglement of cultural material tradition and religious material tradition. And as Sunarjo has written, you can see at the Wayang that at the same time you have entanglement of different religious traditions coming together in the Wayang performances, yeah, the Javanese, Kejawan tradition, the Hindu mystic tradition, etc. And so I would say that the puppeteer, for example, the one who performs the Wayang theater, brings in his interpretation of Sema, for example. Or people are in the Sultan von Demak, or it's Sultan Agung introduces the Punakawan. So people bringing in their idea of representing religious contents in a material form. Yeah. The Punakawan was, Sultan Agung was probably inspired by the forms of the local Javanese goddesses and formed it as a figure who also should transport the new arrived in the 15th century Islamic tradition and intertwined it both with each other. So I try to say that religious materials are an expression of what people in the respective time use as symbols, as materials, as forms to express their belief or their faith or their questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Petra. Oh, sorry. Maybe Albrecht was first. Sorry.
Yes. Hello.
Hi, Albrecht.
Yeah. Hello, Edith. I just took the microphone as well, just to once be able to speak to Marburg from Indonesia, because I'm also a professor there at the university. But I think I also have a remark, of course, in terms of as someone now with an Islamic studies background, and looking at the normative text, I wouldn't say that they are not interchangeable. I mean, there's a lot of still feasible that you have new interpretations, that you have new fields going on, that you have a new look on text in different societies and in different times. So the normativity might be too high. As a saying that this is really not changeable. And although I think as well that the approach over material culture, of course, helps a lot also to understand why some practices, especially from popular culture, can be merged together with religious beliefs. And but one a central point I would also have, coming back to normative text, also a Quran a manuscript has a life, its materiality, and their social life of normative texts, which also play a part in these practices. This is just something I wanted to add. It's not so much a question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you for the comment. I was waiting for this kind of comment because indeed, I wouldn't say that texts don't have their lively, undergo a change or are transformed and new interpreted, etc. That's very clear, and I wouldn't reject this opinion. But I think that things and materials are, how can I say, are more vague in their presence. They could be, they have a wider openness for interpretations because there are no words and no texts. Yeah, so they open a wider sphere for different interpretations than texts do. And in the history, we see that not everyone has Zugang, is able to study the text, to be a scholar, to read, to reinterpret all the books and dogmas, etc. So that was more my point to say that this material culture can reach or is easier accessible for a wider group, and so includes those groups who are perhaps excluded from the high theological debates. Yeah.
Okay, Petra, you had a question too?
Yes, well, what I was thinking, I want to relate to the discussion you had with, I don't remember your name, but about the different stories. I remember that I did research on Karagöz, the Turkish shadow puppet theater. And what you see there is that, yes, the puppeteer is really important, because in the case of Karagöz, it is improvisation theater. There is a story, there's a storyline, but there are all kinds of elements that are not fixed. And even the parts that are fixed can move place in that respect. And that might also be the case with Wayang. But I don't know enough about it. Is it based on a text, or is it based on a story which is interpreted by the puppeteer?
Yeah, the original, or how you could say, quite original form, or the traditional form of Wayang includes the epics of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And it's a very strict order of these epics. Yeah, they are performed always in the same feature with a precise text, etc. Yeah, so the puppeteer has to be able to remember these complicated dramaturgy of these epics, and then that's the new what comes with the introduction of the Punakawan in the Javanese tradition of the 15th and 16th century. The Punakawan were introduced. They came from the Javanese local tradition as additional element, and they act like clowns and tricksters and commend the epics. Yeah. So if the situation is really dramatic, Rama and Sita and they love, and she has to sacrifice herself, then it's possible that the Punakawan intervene and comment. And especially they play an important role in the fight of the Kauravas and the Puranas, as the both sides, the right and the left, the good and the evil, heroes or half gods who fight with each other, which is also a part of these Hindu tradition epics. And then they intervene and help these persons to fulfill their mission. They help the good side, of course, the Punakawan. It has many facets, its history, but they intervene and they can change the situation. And that's new from the 16th century. And that's a big space or field of interpretation of the puppeteer, who then can introduce a dispute with an emperor, a local emperor, or with Kiai or whatever, for discussing the current issues and integrate them in this performance. And you can imagine that these performances last over hours and hours, and that they are not something old-fashioned. I think I have mentioned it in my lecture, is that I have read about this hip-hop wayang. So it's going on with this change, but always on the background of these traditional Hindu epic narratives, which are performed also.
Other questions? Well, I'm not sure if I myself can ask a question, if you allow me. I had, in fact, two questions. One of them has to do with the story you told about St. Kumanis. It's a curiosity because I've heard before about that, and one of the things I've heard by a professor is that the story, that there is also a parallel story of crucified Jesus found in Italy and dressed as a woman, and then a traveler, I think from Flanders or from the north countries, and then it was so astonished by seeing it that it brought it back to his country. So I'm not sure if this is true or it competes with the other narrative, or it goes together and then the other evolved from that one. And my second question is about this materiality, because, that's not my field, but I understand that the body has much to do into that, and you did not go into the body that much, but we know that materials are different depending on the contact you have with them. This, for example, wax. It's hard when you leave it by itself, but it melts when you are touching it. So when you was telling about the praying belts, or I don't know how you call it, and about the wayang, I was thinking, well, the wayang, it's quite interesting because, as you said, you see it from both sides. And then this form, you have the material form, but also its appearance through the shadow, through the light. So is this interplay in this, well, in both cases, these objects are mediators, but in a very different way. I would say, even though in the Wayang, much more mediated, because you also have the narrator, who is in itself also a mediator of this experience. But I was wondering in how far, or what are your thoughts about this relation of the body with the object and the possibilities of revitalization of religion. So thank you.
Yeah. The Sant Ankamba, I would like to talk more about this. It's very important, if you do research on these objects, to follow them really in detail. So we can see that in the medieval part in Europe, in the Tuscany and Lucca, we have this motif of a Christus triumphans. That means Christus is iconographized not with this Dornenkrone, but with a crown and with a blue clothes, not as a woman, but in a gesture which is quite close to that what I have shown you of this bearded woman on the cross. And the second part of this Christus Triumphans is that he is accompanied by a fiddler who becomes a golden shoe from this Christus Triumphans as almosen, so as a gift, yeah, for helping him in his poor situation. And this motive of the picture of the Christus Triumphans you find also in the pictures of the Sant Ankamba. So we can see that these two traditions have interconnected. And yeah, the stories, the legend of this Ankamba goes further, that the father was very upset after he has crucified his daughter, and that he then established the first shrine for her veneration. And might be that in this medieval Europe and all the merchants, travelers around mix these two traditions in the iconography. And so we have very different forms. So it's a wide field of research. And there is research on how they mingled and how these Ankamba were venerated, etc. But this maybe is enough for today. Indeed, materiality is not to separate from body, from the bodies who carry the materials, who take them into the hands, but the bodies themselves are materials. So this material approach is also close connected to bodily experiences and also to the relation between the body and also the human with the body, who, for example, takes the Wayang Kulit figure in the performance and speaks her or his words and bringing it to the screen. Yeah? So there is strong influence, or it's very important to pay attention to what people do with the materials. I hope that this is an answer to what you meant with your question, but I would add just another further aspect, that it's also very interesting to do research on which materials, for example, scriptures are written down. Which kind of materials are there preciously illustrated? Is the calligraphy very elaborated? Is it with wonderful decorative patterns, decorated, etc.? So in all these materials and handling materials, you can learn about the religious intention and ambition of the people fulfilling the rituals, acting with the materials, etc.
Other questions from the public? I do not see any question from online, but no? Well, then I would like to thank you very much, Professor Franke, for your presentation, and I'm going to close the session.
Yeah, I just would like to thank you all for your questions, which are very interesting for me to rethink what I have said. It was only a little bit irritating that when I speak for myself, I see 2% of myself, and so it looks like I've talked to my to myself. But indeed, I enjoyed discussing this topic with you. Thanks a lot, and I hope I can attend tomorrow again.
Thank you to you. Goodbye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Hello, Claudia. Yeah, I really would have preferred to meet you in Jakarta.
Definitely, yeah.
We do.
Next time, kapan lagi.
So I have to find the switch out button.